Hello everyone and welcome back to Atman Unlimited. Today is going to be our first product review. I received a comment from a viewer a little bit ago and they recommended trying to evaluate the new Calmotion Fadal replacement controller. So I thought to myself, sounds like a good idea. So we sent some emails, we had some email exchanges, and Calmotion said yes. Now, for the disclaimer, before we get started, Atman Unlimited is not being compensated in any way to do this review. We are not being paid. This is on my own time, and I'm doing this review to provide information on this controller for everybody out there. Now, Calmotion was nice enough to send us a set of boards that we can review and test. However, at the completion of the review and testing, the boards need to go back to Calmotion. So again, there is no compensation here. It is my goal to give as best and unbiased review as I can. However, I will say that I'm pretty excited about this product, so I have high expectations. So that's the disclaimer, and that's what we're going to start with. Okay, so why do I have high expectations for this product, and why am I excited about it? Well, the one drawback to buying these older machines are the controllers and the maintainability of those controllers. The electronic components that this machine uses are completely and totally obsolete. You cannot buy them, you cannot replace them. Okay? Now, if you want to upgrade a controller, there's a couple of things that you need to think about. Number one on my list is cost. And there are varying costs of options out there, everywhere from, pretty low cost, but extremely DIY and extremely invasive into the machine, to very high cost, very, very high-end professional controllers that this machine really couldn't utilize anyway. And then there's a bunch of middle-of-the-road controllers. Okay? So cost is a big one. Now, if you drill into the cost equation, not only do you have to consider the cost of the controller, but also the cost of installing the controller and how much downtime that installation and retrofit is going to take. And then last, how much retraining and testing time are you going to need to where you feel confident in operating the machine with that new controller? And that is what really is nice about this new Calmotion controller, is that it is, first off, pretty price competitive. It's about in the middle of the cost spectrum. It's not real cheap. It's not brutally expensive. It's kind of in the middle. It's not dirt cheap, okay? But it saves you a ton of money everywhere else down the chain. And here's why. It's a direct plug-in replacement. So you can literally unplug the cards out of the Fadal, plug these new cards in, and be up and running very, very quickly. So your installation costs are very low, extremely low. And they actually target, basic people of just, shop owners and people that have a little bit of maintenance experience being able to upgrade their own machines. You don't have to have a highly skilled electrician come in and rewire half the machine. So that is a huge bonus and a huge cost saver. It also saves you downtime, so you lose less production time. And then the last side of it, of training and operation, they basically duplicated the user experience that you currently have with the Fadal controller with some upgrades. So somebody that already knows how to run a Fadal machine doesn't need to learn anything new. They will be able to walk up to the machine after this upgrade and run it the same way that they did before the upgrade. So, cost of the controller, very little cost for installation, no cost for training and getting yourself reacquainted with the new machine controller. That's huge. Okay? Now, the other things that you need to consider is maintainability of that controller, and then also all the other ancillary costs during that installation. So because this is a direct plug-in replacement, we don't have to change anything else on the machine at all. We can use the existing servo drives, we can use the existing servo motors, spindle drive, all the ancillary stuff that surrounds a controller to really make a machine work, to give that controller the I/O it needs to switch stuff on and off and, actually function. We don't have to change any of that. But we also have to make sure it's maintainable going forward. So the axis drives in these machines, they're still being made today by more than one company. So you can still get these servo drives and you can still replace a bad one if it fails. Spindle drives, same thing. There's multiple companies out there that are making compatible spindle drives that you can replace in this machine. Okay? So then that leads you to some of the boards in the machine. So the big backplane board and the mill interface boards that actually have the big relays on them, okay? Those boards are not necessarily easily replaceable. However, they have completely passive components on them. So they're very easy to repair if they fail. But the level of failure and the likelihood that they'll fail is very low. So, it's worth it to save the money of not having to replace and rewire the entire machine cabinet with accepting the fact that, if this board does have a failure on it, you might have to spend a little bit of extra time repairing it. But because there's virtually no parts on those boards, that likelihood is extremely low. Okay, so this controller fulfills a lot of really good options of easy installation, low cost of installation, not having to replace, any more hardware than you absolutely need to, and then having future maintainability, going forward. Okay, and there's no other controller on the market that I know of that will support all of this. For the DC machines, they support resolvers. For machines that have glass scales, they support scales. For the AC machines, of course, they support the newer AC drives as well. Basically, every option that Fadal has, they are supporting in one way or another. Okay, a lot of the other controller installations, you have to replace a lot of other stuff besides, just the machine controller. Now, with that said and that out of the way, let's go down into the office and we will take a look at what you get, and then we will review the raw boards that we're going to receive, and then kind of how Calmotion went about doing the machine control. So let's head down to the office. Before we look at the boards, let's look at what else you get in the box. And to start off, you get an installation manual. Now this manual just covers the installation of the new cards into the machine and how to do the initial setup. The operation manuals are very similar to the Fadal manuals, and those can all be downloaded online. They are PDF files, so you can download them, save them, print them out if you so choose to. The really nice thing about the Calmotion controller is that it basically operates identically to the Fadal controller. So you don't need to learn a new controller when you're using the new Calmotion boards, which is nice. So then they also give you all of the cables and hardware that you're going to need to perform the install. So they give you some little power pigtails for power. They give you these really nice bulkhead connectors. Let me get both of them here. So this is the Ethernet bulkhead connector, and then this is the USB bulkhead connector. So that's really nice that you can put the bulkheads in. They give you a really long USB cable so that you can put the USB port in the pendant. Then you get a VGA cable. Now, if your machine does not have a VGA monitor in it yet, you will need to upgrade the monitor in your machine to a VGA compatible monitor. Then they give you a bunch of Ethernet cables. Now, even though these are Ethernet cables, they are actually not used for Ethernet. This orange one is specifically used for Ethernet. You can put this controller on a company network, which is really nice. But these cables, even though they're also Ethernet cables, they are not using the Ethernet protocol. And I'll go over that when we review the boards. So I mean, they even went as far as to put furls on these little power pigtails, which is nice. I mean, that's a really nice touch that you don't see a lot when you're buying, you know, stuff like this. So they give you everything you need. One of the boards gets mounted in the pendant on a piece of DIN rail, so they actually give you a piece of DIN rail for that. So complete package here. So let's get into the meat and potatoes. Let's look at the new processor board that you're going to get. So this is the Calmotion brain board. And what they did is they have a daughter board type design here. So the bottom board is the Fadal specific board, and that's in the Fadal footprint that will slide into your card file. And they have the same edge connector backplane as your existing Fadal boards. And then there's some chips and components on there to handle the Fadal interface. Then they have a main processing board here that's a daughter board that plugs into the Fadal board. And then on top of that, they've got an Ethernet board here, and this is the Ethernet connector that provides your connectivity to an external network if you choose to use that. This is your USB port, so that's where your USB cable will go into to put your USB port on the pendant so that you can use USB thumb drives on the machine. And then these two connectors over here, this yellow one is for video, and the blue one is a high-speed data bus. Okay, now they color-coded everything for you, so it's real easy to hook up. And if you notice, they even color-coded the cables. So blue cables are your high-speed data bus. Yellow cable is your video link, so this one runs to the pendant. And your orange cable is your network link, which goes to your orange one in your bulkhead, Ethernet bulkhead. So again, really easy to install. You know, everything's color-coded. And then this board actually replaces 3 of the older Fadal boards. So in addition to being the processor board, this also is partial of the video board and then also the communication board. So let's look at the older Fadal board. So you can see they're the same size, same footprint, so this card will slide in place of this exact control card. Now, the old Fadal boards, this is a -4 vintage, it uses a 286. The -5 boards use a 386 chip. Now, what Calmotion is using is they're using a combination of processors and DSPs. DSP stands for a digital signal processor. Basically, it's a hybrid microprocessor that's specifically designed for high-power math and control applications. So it's well suited in the CNC environment. So this board replaces your old controller board, and then it also replaces the old video card board. Okay, so you know, this will do the control and the video, and then it also replaces the communications board. So this card here is responsible for the RS-232 port, and that's what this connector is here. And if you notice, Calmotion used the exact identical connector here. So again, plug and play compatibility and very easy to install. So this one card replaces all 3 of these cards. And again, that's just with, you know, the modern technology of the surface mount components and having higher density microprocessors. So now let's also talk about, let's look at the Axis cards. We'll put that one to the side. Let's pull out an Axis card. So this is a DC Axis card. So keep in mind the Fadal machines, there's 2 vintages. An older vintage which uses brushed DC motors for the drive axes, and then the newer machines use brushless AC motors for the drives of the axes. You have to specify to Calmotion which machine that you have, so they'll send you the right cards. There's 2 versions of their access control card, one for DC machines and one for AC machines. And again, that's a huge benefit that this controller has over other competitors, because this DC control card will still use the resolvers that are existing in the machine. So again, we don't have to change the motors. We don't have to change the resolvers. We don't have to change the axes drives. Okay, we can use everything else in the machine as is. We just have to replace these cards. Now these cards are also, these components aren't populated on this version of this card, but there's also the encoder input. So if you have glass scales on your machine, again, they will support that and they will populate these components for you, and you can add glass scales to your machine. Or if you have them, you can, still utilize them. Okay, so again, really nice direct plug-in replacement. Now, these cards are not specific to any axes. They're configurable. They can do X, Y, Z, or ABC. And they did a similar thing that the old Fadal boards have. They've got a bank of dip switches here, and you configure these switches to tell this card which axes it's going to be controlling. And the really nice thing that they did is they put a silk screen marking here of the table of how to set these switches for which axis that this card's going to go into. So you don't need to fumble through the manuals looking for how to set these switches. It's right there for you to see. Okay, so that's the DC card. Now the spindle drive uses the AC version of the board, so the folks that have AC machines, you can see what the AC card looks like. And then this card does have the encoder input populated up here, and the scale input. So AC machines, they don't use resolvers, they use encoders. So your encoder goes here, and then if you're running scales on your machine, your scale input would go here. The scale is basically just an additional encoder. And again, these boards are very similar, and Calmotion did a nice job on reusing the same microprocessors and chips across all their boards, so they're keeping commonality in their parts. Very, very good design decisions. Okay, so all these cards, you see these blue connectors on. Let's just talk about what they're doing there. If you look at the existing Fadal cards, you'll notice on the processor, display, and communication board, there's this extra connector here, and then you have this board here that goes on it. And basically this provides an additional communication bus for the old boards. Well, Calmotion did the exact same thing, but in a little bit modern way. So this edge connector in the backplane that's in your card file, it was conceived back in the late 80s, early 90s. It may have been revised, but it's not up to the task of the very high-speed digital communications that we have today. So what Calmotion decided to do is they daisy chain these cards together. Okay, so you plug one into one, the next, and then the next, and then they give you these little blue pigtails. Okay, now even though that these are, Ethernet jacks, they're not using Ethernet for their communication. What they're using is a high-speed serial communication protocol. And this is really nice because, one, it keeps your component cost down and your complexity down. It makes your software easier. Ethernet is a much more complex protocol than a simple serial protocol. This is going to be very deterministic and time stamped, so that you can have very good control over your timing and your synchronization between all the cards, so that you have good axis synchronization. So I really like what they did here and how they did it. This methodology is actually the same methodology that I use in my professional job, and I've implemented very similar schemes in my stuff. So that's what all these blue connectors are for. This is a high-speed digital communication link between all the boards, so that they can share data much faster than the old Fadal boards ever could think of. Okay, so here's just for giggles, here's a comparison. This is an old the axis control board, and you can see the difference here. This barely has any room to breathe, and we only have maybe a half a dozen components on the new one. And again, that's just because of today's modern semiconductor technology compared to the old through-hole stuff. Okay, so there is your spindle control board, your axis control board. DC AC. Okay, so now there is one additional board that you're going to have that the current board or the current Fadal controller doesn't use, and this is your video output board. Now this board is going to get installed in your pendant, and again, everything's color coded. So from your control board, the yellow Ethernet jack to this yellow one in your pendant, and then this is your VGA output to your monitor. And then this board requires a 5-volt power, which is available in the pendant, and that's what that pigtail's for. Let's see here, this guy. That's what this pigtail's for, is so that you can power this board. This is one of the very few new connections that you need to make. So there's the video monitoring board. Now, one thing that I did notice, and I asked them on this, is that these are not a complete replacement set of cards. There are some cards in your machine that they do not have replacements for, okay? And those cards, very specifically, are the mill interface board, which is the 1040 card, and if you have a spindle chiller, the temperature control card for the spindle chiller. And I asked them, I said, okay, you're providing a new controller solution, why isn't it a complete solution? And their answer was very logical. They simply said that these two boards are already being offered as new replacements from other companies. Okay, so they felt that re-engineering these boards again, seeing that somebody else has already done it, would not be cost effective in their minds. So you can reuse these existing boards, so these boards can stay original Fadal boards. If you have a failure of one of these cards, you have two options. One, if you notice on these boards, all of the components are passive. There's no microprocessors or EEPROMs or programming of chips, and these passive components are very common, old school logic parts. I cross-referenced a couple of them, and you can still find direct pin-to-pin compatible components. So you could repair these boards. You have the capability of getting parts to repair these boards, or like Calmotion recommended, there are other manufacturers making direct brand new replacements of these cards. And then the third card is the clock board. So if you have a DC machine, there's a clock board in the machine. I only have one of those, and it's actually in the machine right now, so I can't show you that in this video. But again, it's all passive, and somebody else makes a brand new replacement for it already. So with that answer and seeing that those replacements are available brand new, I'm okay with the answer that they basically say another third party can provide replacements for these cards if they fail. Because again, we don't want to go through the effort and cost of upgrading a controller if we cannot maintain it going forward. So we can maintain these boards going forward. It's not a showstopper in my opinion. So that pretty much completes the review of what you're going to get and what the cards are and how they work. I'm also an electrical engineer myself, as a lot of you alluded to. Just looking at these boards and how they're laid out and their manufacturing, I really don't have any complaints on them, and I'm pretty critical person. So the layout of the boards is really nice. They're following very good layout technique and rules. The quality of the boards is very high. There's no flux left over on the boards from manufacturing. So just the quality, form, fit, and function, of these boards, how they went about doing it, I really don't have anything to complain about. So, we'll see in the next video when we go to install and actually start using these boards how they perform. But I have pretty high expectations that they're going to perform very well. Just seeing the time and thought and effort that went into making them right and doing a very nice layout and, providing a quality product. So far, really nice boards. So that's going to conclude our unboxing video. So you can see that what you get when you purchase one of these controllers is pretty comprehensive. They basically give you everything that you're going to need to install the system. Now, again, keep in mind that there are a couple of cards that are not going to be provided, and you can reuse your old existing Fadal cards. And if you have a failure of those cards, I did look it up and I was able to find third-party companies that are making brand new versions of those cards already. So again, I think this is a really good option for an upgrade at face value right now. It's got everything that we would want of a reasonable price, very easy installation, you know, not having to tear into the machine to do the installation, and then having the same user experience when we're done so we don't have to retrain operators in the operation of the new controller. So overall, you know, it's looking like a really nice package. So coming up in the next videos, we're going to do an installation video where we'll actually install the controller, and we'll go step by step of the things that you need to do to properly install this controller in a Fadal. And then we plan on evaluating how good and comparing this controller with the existing Fadal control. Okay, so we're going to do some test parts. We already ball barred and laser surveyed the machine, so we're trying to eliminate the machine variable as best we can, and we're going to use the same survey, backlash, and configuration values in the new controller that is in the existing controller now. Then we're going to bring the ball bar back in. We're going to ball bar the machine with the new controller and, you know, compare the ball bar results at various feed rates. So we're gonna do that, and then we're also going to machine some test parts, and we're going to try to compare the test parts and see you know, if you get any advantages with the new controller over the old controller, which I'm hoping and I'm thinking that we're going to see some better parts, better finishes, better feed rates out of the new controllers, just because I think they're running at a much higher loop rate, and then also they have a much higher capability of processing number of blocks. So your 3D contouring and interpolation from your camming packages, the newer controller is going to, of course, be able to execute a lot more code than the older controllers. So, looking forward to making those videos. So stay tuned, and thanks for watching the unboxing video.